Well, hello again, everyone. Last time we talked about the very basics of rhythm and meter. Rhythm is duration, meter is a regular grouping of durations. I want to talk today a little bit about subdivision and organization, so we have a better sense of what's going on here. So you see kind of up on your screen right now, right in the middle of the screen, roughly you see 4 quarter notes, which is sort of our standard starting point here. Now, 4 quarter notes by themselves, that doesn't mean anything. That just means you have 4 note values of equal length. You have no other context other than here are 4 note values that are of equal length. But not all music contains note values of equal length. Some note values are longer, some note values are shorter. So what we see here first is if you take each quarter note and break it into 2 equal parts, well, what's half of 1 quarter? The response is, of course, an eighth. So what we have here is an eighth note. So each quarter note is equivalent to 2 eighth notes. The reverse is true as well. If we have 2 quarter notes and we want a single note value that takes up the same duration as 2 quarter notes, so instead of ta, ta, we get ta, then we can combine those to get, well, what's 2 times a quarter? And the answer is 1/2. So we have half notes here. You can combine half notes to make a whole note as well. So 1 whole note is equivalent to 2 half notes, which is equivalent to 4 quarter notes, which is equivalent to 8 eighth notes, which is equivalent to 16 sixteenth notes. And you'll notice I go from an eighth note to a 16th note by adding a flag. And we'll talk about beaming and things like that a little later on. So if I wanted to subdivide a 16th note into 2 equal parts, I would have, that's right, a 32nd note. It would have 3 flags, and 64th notes, 4 flags, etc. So the process of subdivision is pretty straightforward. It's based on everything being equally divisible into 2 parts. And we also have this, which is to say that something my first composition teacher, Dr. Fred Mueller, always said, no music is music too. We need to be able to convey silence for certain durations as well as sound. So we have here rest, and I've put 3 examples of rests up here. You have a quarter rest, which takes up the same amount of time as a quarter note, whatever that may be. An eighth rest, which takes up the same amount of time as an eighth note, and a 16th rest, which takes up the same amount of time as a 16th note. There are half rests. They are usually on the 3rd line of a staff pointing up. So you count up from the bottom there, 1, 2, 3, go 3rd line up, and then put a little rectangular block. Takes about half the space pointing up, that's a half rest. And then there's the whole rest, which hangs down from the 2nd line from the top. And they simply mean that for that duration, make no sound. So because of this, we have some equivalencies here. 4 quarter notes would take up the same amount of durational space as a half note followed by 2 quarter notes, which would take up the same amount of durational space as a whole note, which, continuing on, same amount of space as quarter, half quarter, quarter, 2/8, quarter, quarter, the bingo rhythm from the old song, about the farmer and the dog, B-I-N-G-O. It's actually the reverse of the bingo rhythm, B-I-N-G-O, backwards, so B-I-N-G-O, which I know just shattered your childhood right there by running that backwards. Same amount of space, 4 16th notes, 2 8th notes, quarter note, and a quarter rest, which takes up the same amount of space as a quarter rest, half note, and 2 8th notes. All of these, if you keep the tempo constant, will take up the exact same amount of space. Each one of these would be equivalent to each other. And there's also the idea of the dot, which doesn't seem like it would do much. But what the dot does is it takes half, again, of the main note value. So if I have a half note and I put a dot next to it, I then sound that half note for the duration of 3 quarter notes instead of 2. A dotted quarter would be the duration of 3 eighth notes instead of 2. A dotted whole note would be 3 half notes instead of 2, or 6 quarters instead of 4. The subdivisions continue on down. You do not re-articulate. If I have, if this is my beat and I have a quarter note getting each beat, a half and a quarter would sound like this. ta, ta. Whereas a dotted half note combines the two values, so you do not re-articulate. So it would be ta, like so. So these note values and rest values are relational, which means that a half note and a quarter note have a 2-to-1 relationship. A quarter note and a whole note have a 1-to-4 relationship. So to get one whole note, you need 4 quarter notes, etc. And because of that, we need more context. When we organize meters into measures, and when you have measures that just says that every time you come around to a downbeat, which is the first beat of any one measure, you're going to put a little more emphasis on it, then you need to be able to show what's going on here. So some of you may have seen things like this here on the left in some of your early method books, or maybe if you had recorder back in 3rd grade. And this is actually a more accurate approach to life than what we see over here on the right, which is probably what you're more familiar with. It looks kind of like a weird fraction. On the top, you will have a number, and on the bottom, you will have, in the more accurate way, a note value, on the more common way, another number. And what the top number tells you is how many beats there are in a measure. But even that's not entirely true. As we'll see when we get to compound meter, we've always been taught this is the number of beats in a measure. That's not entirely true. The top number tells you how many of the bottom you have in each measure. Depending on tempo, what's on the bottom may not necessarily be the beat. So 4 quarter notes, or as we sometimes see it, 4/4, simply means that there are 4 quarter notes in each measure. So you're going to define each measure by having the space of 4 quarter notes. Now, a bar of 4/4, and all of these up here were bars of 4/4. There's 4 quarter notes. Here's the equivalent of 4 quarter notes, a half of 2 quarters. Here's the equivalent of 4 quarter notes, a whole note. So just because it's 4/4 doesn't necessarily mean that there will be quarter notes in every measure. That simply means that each measure will contain 4 quarters. And because of how this is set up here, we refer to 4/4 as a simple quadruple, because the implication is when it's just a regular old quarter note getting the beat, or some sort of note value that is subdivisible into 2 parts, as are all of these, that each beat will be subdivided into 2 4 parts, however many you've got going on there. And that's the simple subdivision. Compound is its own thing. We'll talk about that later. In that case, we'll be dealing with dotted quarters and things like that here. But in simple meter, the implication is that every beat is divisible into 2 parts. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1E, and a 2E, and a 3E, and a 4E, and that kind of thing. So what we have here is a simple quadruple. Some other examples here. 3/4 would be a simple triple. 2/4 would be a simple duple. 3 quarter notes in every measure. 2 quarter notes in every measure. Each measure, as it appears on the staff, would then be closed off with one single line to let you know that that measure is ended and the next measure is begun. That is a bar line, and we'll talk about that more in class. We'll put some stuff on the board and discuss some notational issues there. So, I hope this is a good start. These past 2 videos, I think, are a pretty good introduction to the idea of rhythm and meter. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thanks, and have a great rest of your day.